have Christina Milburn. She's intellectual property lawyer with Rogers Communications. And we have John Ward, who is Executive Vice President for Friend MTS. And hopefully they will join me right now. Here's John. And there you are, Christina. Welcome, both of you, to the Video Security Summit.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Yes, so both of you. John, you're muted as well. Could you unmute yourself? Just leave yourself unmuted. If we have an echo problem, you can always go back on.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. So why don't we kick it off with, let's do some quick introductions. I want to know, and I think everybody would like to know a little bit about what you do. So why don't we start with you, Christina? Tell us what you do.
Absolutely. Well, I'll first start out by thanking you for inviting me to speak to this group today. I'm very, very excited to be with you. Content protection is where I spend a lot of my time. And as a result, I'm quite passionate about it. I work as in-house counsel for Rogers Communications. We're one of Canada's large broadcasters and distributors, Canada's largest wireless company. And so we've got a lot of lines of business. And primarily, we have many points of access to Canadians. We've got many opportunities to both create content or license it, as well as distribute it, and really act as, I think, storytellers of history. I spend a lot of my time increasingly on content protection because it is a growing concern. And I've had the great fortune over the last 8 years to build a team that's specifically focused on this area in order to create value for Rogers as a company.
Very good. Thank you very much. John?
Sure. So John Ward with Friend MTS, 3 months and 19 days in to this new role. My background prior to Friend, live sports, live production across Fox Sports, DirecTV, and AT&T. So I've kind of seen the gamut of live sports production, live content creation, to the distribution piece of content, now to content protection. At Friend MTS, I'm responsible for business and strategy here in the Americas. And again, kind of a new venture for me, but certainly looking forward to the challenges that clearly are present within this sector.
Well, I know you're new at Friend MTS, but I know Friend MTS is not new at all. It's been around a long time. I wonder if you could sort of reach back into your past and into Friend MTS's past and give us a perspective on how things have changed over the years for content companies and how they've responded. You've been protecting the content and the revenue for so long. Hopefully you can give us a perspective on that change trajectory over that time.
Sure. I think it was probably, Colin, always taken seriously, but I think even more so now, especially with the cost of acquiring the rights to this live and exclusive content. And look, I think as time has moved on, you alluded to it earlier in the talk you gave in the UK. I mean, pirates continue to evolve. The whole space continues to evolve. Things have become way more sophisticated with regard to the way pirates operate, creating own networks that look and feel much like normal pay TV networks that people pay for, that they're not really aware of what they're actually doing. So, look, it's a space that there's always been crime. It will continue to evolve. And what we're trying to do, along with Christina and other companies, is trying to basically mitigate this, right? Detect, deter, and eventually disable piracy. So it continues to evolve as the ways we consume content continue to evolve. That much is for sure.
That's the thing that really is most surprising. It can dupe even the most well-informed. There was a columnist in my newspaper who writes about technology. He announced he would be talking about a new video service that allows you to save a ton of money the next week, and then that never appeared. And I suspect he was duped as well. Christina, you've been doing this a while. Give us a sense of the shift in attitudes towards piracy over the last few years.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, when I got to Rogers about 8 years ago, nobody was really doing content protection within my organization in a systematic way. You would either rely on a trade association who had piracy amongst its many issues, many industry issues on behalf of which, they would advocate. But I think after the satellite piracy phase of the 90s, there had been a bit of complacency around responding to these latest trends. I see more companies are now recognizing the need to dedicate resources to this issue. As I see it, the walled garden has been breached. Like, you used to be able to compete, get your content out there based on this huge advantage that you had, which was the fact that your content was accessible through these tried and true media, and pirated content was more restricted. But with the rise of the application age of the internet, right? Like, with the rise of this preponderance of content, which is now just very, very easily accessible, that is changing. Like, the ecosystem is not closed anymore. And so, you cannot rely on consumers to necessarily know the difference between a legitimate, traditional, sanctioned source of content versus a pirated or unlawful source. Many times we see that the offerings, these pirate offerings are slick. They have easy to use interfaces. They confound the subscriber. They can confound the end user. In some instances, they require a change of money changing hands, which again reinforces this belief to many end users that this is perfectly legitimate. So in my view, I see a growing trend, which is that more aggressive strategies are being implemented to deal with this type of problem. More resourcing for enforcement is needed. And so I think I feel that media companies are now starting to awake to this issue, that unless you sort of get a handle on this now, you may pass a tipping point after which, the genie is out of the bottle. You can't necessarily reverse this trend.
So it sounds like, from your perspective, in some respects, maybe in the past, companies may have treated this as a cost center, but now they're suddenly realizing, well, this is really impacting our revenue. So
yeah, I mean, I think that's right, Colin. I would say, again, the ecosystem was a little bit different. So to be perfectly fair to the executives who would have made these decisions and determined this calculus, it could have been that, 10, 15 years ago, maybe the calculus didn't support an aggressive strategy. I think we're now past that point. I think we're in a point in time where, if you are a content producer, media company, whatever, if you've got exclusives, you need to be able to monetize those exclusives, and you need to understand that your exclusives may already be out in the wild, so to speak. There's so many sort of ways in which DRM can be overcome. To say nothing, and this is not to impugn the DRM vendors or the technology that exists. This is to just underscore that for people who are determined to get content out there and to monetize an illegal piracy outfit, they will find a way to get that content to their masses. So, you can have the best DRM in the world, you can have the best encryption, but, for all a pirate could be your subscriber and they could be rebroadcasting the content. You see them as a legitimate paying entity to your service, but they're sort of leaking all that content on the back end. So in my view, we're at a moment in time where the realities, sort of dictate the need to have more staunch enforcement, just as a commercial imperative, because content is quite expensive.
So I think Steve touched on this a little bit at the beginning, and that is this is very, very complicated to enforce this and to go after piracy. You really can't do this on your own, can you, John? You really have to develop a set of partnerships that really help you to take it on. Talk us through that. Maybe give us an example, and then I'll flip it over to Christina with the same question.
Sure. So, I mean, that's it exactly. I think that, you know, partners in this, especially with Christina and Rogers in particular, right, are critical to helping one, you know, for companies like us to develop products, continue to develop and evolve them as things happen. But ultimately, it's got to be a group effort. It has to be the content creators, the content distributors, and the anti-piracy companies and the security companies all working together to cohesively develop these strategies. And look, I think it needs to be a part of any contemplated strategy with content delivery. You budget all costs, you budget your operational costs to distribute and deliver the content. This is insurance, right? This is, at the end of the day, what this becomes is insurance protecting your valuable IP and the distribution of that IP. And partners enable us to basically work together more collaboratively, more cohesively, and the ability to sort of set the standard. You know, look, Christina has been at this a while, the company, and they take it seriously. And I think that's really what it takes for this industry, is for people to band together and work together to creatively come up with solutions to these problems, because these problems are not going to just go away. Continuing to do the same thing and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity, right? You have to start.
Right. And Christina, when we were chatting before the panel, one of the things you said, you sort of gave three pieces of advice. One of them you said was developing strong partnerships. Tell me how that translates to you and Ross.
Yeah. From my perspective, for anyone who is involved in a content protection strategy or leading a content protection strategy, you need to understand who your vendors are. Know your vendors. I sort of alluded to an anecdote, which was, you know, I used to, before we could travel and commingle more freely, when I would go to a piracy conference or any kind of conference in the broadcasting space, I would spend time visiting all of the vendor tables because I wanted to collect their materials. I wanted to understand what is innovative about this company, what is innovative about that company. Do they have problems? Do they have solutions to problems that I haven't even identified yet? You know, I bring the problems, the vendors bring the solutions, and from my perspective, it's about matching up problems to solutions. So I recognize that there are a whole host of people far smarter than I am who are innovating in this space, and my role is to identify those who, frankly, are offering solutions to problems that I'm grappling with. So certainly know your vendors as a starting point. And then once you understand what they do and what's innovative, you know, create a strategy, build a strategy around, you know, what vendor X or Y or Z is telling you. Very often, you know, I don't want to oversimplify it, but, you know, very often it's just about connecting the dots. And so the third sort of thing, and I'll say this too around, you know, building your strategy. Do you need other people involved? Who are your stakeholders? Do you need corporate buy-in? Do you have to go to your executives and get, you know, a green light for a strategy that you posit? I mean, we all sort of work within different bureaucracies. So for some people, you know, it might be a more simple process. In my case, if I, you know, want to lead an initiative, I sort of have to storyboard it from start to finish. This is what it's going to look like. And this is the result we hope to achieve. So
can I just jump in? There was one thing you said when we were discussing beforehand that really caught my attention, and I'm sure our audience will find this interesting as well. You said you had to develop a strategy around not just the technology, but around the law, and the two things together. So tell us what you mean there. Maybe you can give us an example. I think you talked about Gold TV. Give us an example.
Sure. Yeah. And listen, I mean, my background is law. So, you know, when I think about solving a problem, my brain immediately goes to how can I make this case in court, or if I need to restrain somebody's activities, how can I do that through legal mechanisms? Increasingly, I'm recognizing the need to marry, data to evidence, really, to support various legal outcomes. And where, you'd mentioned Gold TV, Colin. Gold TV was an initiative that we pursued in concert with a couple of our large, I'll call them other large Canadian broadcasters, really to restrain the activities of a pirate IPTV service. I think we're all increasingly familiar with these types of services that stream 1,000 channels or 2,000 or however many, including both English language content, whether from the US or Canada, or worldwide content. And our network analytics really made the case for this being the top service being watched by our subscribers within our broadband footprint. And so we recognize that this service was right to be taken down. We built a legal case around restraining the operators of that service. We got a couple of injunctions against them, but not surprisingly, because they were anonymous and not based within my jurisdiction, which is Canada, they continued operating. And so what we were ultimately able to do was get an order restraining or requiring Canadian ISPs to block access to that service, to the domain name of Gold TV that they were using to distribute their content. And in identifying the domain name, and I think it was alluded to earlier on the previous panel, like pirates will migrate domains where, one domain is blocked or one IP address is blocked, they'll, reroute their infrastructure. So this is where we were able to reach out to Friend MTS and say, hey, we want to make sure anytime they move their infrastructure, like we're very confident in the domain name that they're using, because of course we're then going to court to ask for an update to this order. And so we can't afford to be wrong. We really need to rely on the intelligence of a trusted partner. And so that was a great example whereby we were able to sort of leverage the intelligence that Friend MTS collects in a way, again, that's much more niche and expert than anything we could do, even off the side of our desks. Like, I work with a ton of smart engineers and network professionals, and they have their day job. They're fantastic in supporting our various initiatives, but there's always sort of instances where you need to go to the correct person, somebody who can really vouch for the accuracy of the intelligence. And so that was a great example whereby we were able to get that intelligence through Friend MTS's partnership.
So John, you provided Christina the insurance she needed. Talk about what that meant, what that means to do that.
So that's a perfect example of the collaboration that's needed between partners and anti-piracy companies, right, and distributors. I mean, the business intelligence we provided is only as good as the willingness of the partner and broadcaster to then take that with the right analytics and try to go through the enforcement process with the local authorities. And we continue to monitor for these guys. It's huge. I mean, it's the crux of what we do, monitoring and enforcement. And look, moving forward, it's one of those things. That was a specific situation where we were able to work together and collaborate on a particular solution to solve her particular problem, right? And I think that's at the crux of all of the anti-piracy measures, is identifying what actually works, what we can do or anyone could do to kind of be a part of that solution, and then following through with it to actually see the enforcement piece. Because all of the work that leads up to it, without the actual sort of gravitas to move forward with the actual enforcement piece, all you have is data at that point. It's partnerships like Rogers and with Christina's group that make that a very viable solution.
Yeah. So I'm going to stay with you for a second here, John. One of the things that I mentioned to Christina was the fact that many companies view these type of efforts as cost centers. And unfortunately, with cost centers, when they're viewed as cost centers, when cost cutting, we're always trying to trim budgets. they're very often trimmed first, and so you really end up with a minimal effort in this area, the bare minimum that people think that they can get by with. This is a big mistake, isn't it? Tell us why that's a big mistake.
It is. If companies are brought in at the beginning of the process, the solution to craft at that point is probably going to have a better shot of efficacy than to come in after the fact. In other words, the house is already on fire. How do we put the fire out? As opposed to being a part of sort of the design and the architecture of the original sort of delivery platform, or the mechanism by which content is going to actually be delivered. And to be fair, probably is even cheaper if you're brought in at the onset of the actual process, only because you're now not working around a bunch of things that have actually changed and been created to actually deliver the content. You're part of the delivery mechanism. I mean, that's the sort of crown jewel for us, or any company like us, is to be brought in at the very beginning. And it's, to your point about cost centers and costs, I view it, and I managed and created budgets most of my 30-year career. This is a line item. This has to be considered as important. I mean, I've had to cut budgets and create budgets for many shows, but at the end of the day, it's an essential piece of the overall delivery puzzle, because at the end, you're spending so much money to create the content. The fraction of money that's needed to actually protect it is minuscule to the overall loss that ultimately is what is totally possible and highly likely if you don't take the steps ahead to protect the content from the very onset.
Yeah. Christina, so one of the things that shocks me in this business constantly is how creative the bad guys are. They're really taking advantage of all the new technologies, all the new weaknesses. That means that we have to be really creative too, doesn't it?
I couldn't agree with you more. I think what always strikes me is how creative and clever the bad guys are. Like, I think sometimes they can be dismissed too easily, but these are sophisticated enterprises in many cases, right? Like in some instances, I see the bad guys sort of setting up operations that I almost like want to tip my hat to, because they're collecting quite a lot of money. They're very, very lucrative. So all of that to say, yes, we need to fight fire with fire. We too need to be creative. And I'll maybe just touch on a couple of, I think, innovative things that we have tried to do at Rogers, in addition to kind of crafting novel legal strategies and understanding what various vendors have to offer. But, I'm a big believer that data, will tell the tale. It will make your case for you in most instances. If you work in a heavily matrixed or vertically integrated organization, is there data in other parts of the organization that you can use to support your strategy? Again, the example I give as somebody who worked for a company that's both media, wireless, and broadband distribution is, I try to query that broadband data. I want to understand, within the confines of our privacy policy, of course, which IPTV, illegal IPTV services are popular. And very often that data is anonymized and aggregated. So it is actually available to me in a manner, again, that protects the privacy of our subscribers. But I can then use that to understand who I need to target and who I need to deploy resources against. We at Rogers recognize we should develop a piracy lab. It sounds fancy. It's really not, but it's just a dedicated area where we can work on this problem, and also where we can bring stakeholders to advocate for changes in the law, or get people to understand really what we're up against. This is often a problem that, millennials understand very well, Gen Z understands very well, but for a lot of people in power, they might not have a keen grasp of how easy content leaks and how easily it is to access. And so we demonstrate within that environment exactly what we're up against. Dummy accounts, we've set up a tip line so that all employees within my organization, if they come across an unlawful pirate service, or if somebody tries to sell them illegal IPTV, like I want to know about it. So just send me an email. Like it's sort of an anonymized piracy server. But again, you know, now 25,000 people are also eyes and ears on the ground, so that if they pick up a flyer, you know, on their way home, they see one of those lawn signs, free IPTV, you know, illegal IPTV, but whatever, that's not how it's marketed. They can then turn that information over to myself and my team. So, you know, those are just little examples, but we do have to be creative in responding to this problem, because the pirates are very, very clever, and they're very, very incentivized. There's money here, there's money on the table. They're not going to walk away without a fight.
Well, I'm going to ask you both in the last few minutes here to put on your seeing in the future hats and tell us what you think is going to happen in the future. Are things going to get better, going to get worse? So is there anything you can point at that you think is very hopeful that we'll start to get the upper hand? And let's start with you on this, John.
I would tell you that, in my opinion, look, right now, especially in the OTT space, the D2C space, there is a rush to just add subscribers, right? They're all competing to add subscribers. And maybe piracy for a lot of these companies and platforms has not been a concern. At some point, this levels off as far as the subscriber piece goes. And I think you're going to see consolidation to a greater extent than we've already seen it. Once those two factors come into play, I think at that point, then they'll really start to look at, why are we not retaining subscribers? Where are they going? What can we do to protect our content more? So look, I think we're in the golden age of content creation and distribution. We have been for a while, but the hope is that, you know, as this matures a little bit more, this will get taken more seriously. Will we completely eliminate piracy? No. But we can absolutely be better at it than we've been, and continue to evolve product sets to help detect, deter, and hopefully, you know, disable as much as we possibly can.
Very good. Christina, give us hope.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. I mean, I think piracy is, at least in the short to medium term, I mean, we're obviously responding to, so I have tremendous in the resources that I instantly see deployed against this problem. But I think sort of two trends jump out at me. So innovation on behalf of the media companies, like we just have to keep innovating and creating like fantastic products and great content in a way that, you know, makes people want to view it with us, whether it's through ease of access, reasonable pricing, multitude of features on the same service. Like we have to be very, very innovative in terms of how we both deliver our content, but also in terms of the content we create. And then there's the enforcement piece. And I really see these two having to work in tandem. No one will do it on its own, but there has to be an enforcement strategy. There has to be a willingness to go out and protect your brand, protect your exclusives, protect your content. I mean, almost as a point of indignation, right? Like we should all be really aghast when we see people take our stuff for free. And so I bring the indignation. I back that up with the legal action. And I think there has to be both of those things present. I think through that two-pronged approach, we can, keep this industry thriving, keep the ecosystem thriving, and keep the pirates at bay.